Okay, well, let me start with kind of a recap since we didn't have class on Thursday. So we made it through book 1, and I kind of tried to impress upon you that even though Socrates has defeated some of these interlocutors in argument, Polemarchus, Cephalus, Thrasymachus, Cleitophon, even though he's defeated them in argument, he's kind of used some fishy arguments to get there, right? Doesn't seem like his arguments are all that great. And I tried to convince you that there's a reason for this. And that's that Socrates is battling over the education of these two young men, Glaucon and Adeimantus, Plato's brothers, who are young men who are going to join Athenian politics in the not-too-distant future. So Socrates is very concerned with making sure that they get a good education. That their education comes from philosophers, not from sophists. And we began book 2, basically, with Glaucon saying, look, Socrates, you haven't convinced us that your position is right. That justice is good in and of itself. That it's desirable in and of itself. That it is more profitable than injustice. So that's where we're currently at. Glaucon and Adeimantus have brought to Socrates this myth known as the Ring of Gyges, in which it is argued if somebody had the power, had this artifact of a ring that allowed them to turn visible and invisible at will, that they would follow the same path. Right? They would both be doing unjust things if they could get away with it. And I made a distinction last time between two different kinds of laws that Glaucon was distinguishing between in 359c. Between nomos and phusis. Phusis, remember, was natural law. The idea is something like, look, if you let something just take its natural course and do what it's going to do, it's going to follow certain rules. The natural urges and instincts and drives that you have are constituent parts of the natural law. Glaucon thought that if we let people just follow what they're going to do naturally, they're naturally going to do unjust things. And I tried to tease out that this is similar to the Christian view of humanity, right? That humanity is fallen, that humanity is inherently sinful, whose will is antithetical to the will of God, who naturally does selfish, sinful things. So there's phusis, and then there's nomos, which means like legalistic law or convention. The laws of a society or the conventions and norms of a society that a group of people come up with and impose on others. Glaucon is basically arguing here that naturally people are going to do unjust things if it's not for laws and social conventions that pressure them into doing the right thing, or that punish them if they do the wrong thing. So, we began reading the Myth of Gyges. I'm going to start at 360a, just 2 lines down from that. So, this shepherd who found the ring, he experimented with the ring to test whether it indeed had this power to become invisible. And it did. If he turned the setting inward, he became invisible. If he turned it outward, he became visible again. As soon as he realized this, he arranged to become one of the messengers sent to report to the king. On arriving there, he seduced the king's wife, attacked the king with her help, killed him, and in this way took over the kingdom. So I tried to argue last time that I think what Plato is getting at with this part of the story is he's putting forth an allegory for bad education. Okay? And this makes sense given the context of the dialogue. Remember, Socrates is concerned about making sure he is presiding over the education of these young men. So it makes sense that Plato would put in a little allegory about bad education here. What is the message? Well, it's something like people who receive a bad education are going to do bad things. They're going to do immoral, unjust, selfish things. Injustice corrupts the soul, and it corrupts society, and it compels people to subvert the moral and the social political order that they occupy. And this is exactly what we see happening in the ring of Gyges in this story. Let's suppose then that there were two such rings, one worn by the just person and the other by the unjust. Now no one, it seems, would be so incorruptible that he would stay on the path of justice, or bring himself to keep away from other people's possessions and not touch them, when he could take whatever he wanted from the marketplace with impunity, go into people's houses and have sex with anyone he wished, kill or release from prison anyone he wished, and do all the other things that would make him like a god among humans. And in so behaving, he would do no differently than the unjust person, but both would pursue the same course. This, some would say, is strong evidence that no one is just willingly, but only when compelled. No one believes justice to be a good thing when it is kept private, since whenever either person thinks he can do injustice with impunity, he does it. Indeed, all men believe that injustice is far more profitable to themselves than is justice. And when what they believe is true, so the exponent of this argument will say. For someone who did not want to do injustice, given this sort of opportunity, and who did not touch other people's property, would be thought most wretched and most foolish by everyone aware of the situation. Though, of course, they would praise him in public, deceiving each other for fear of suffering injustice. So much for my second topic. As for the decision itself about the life of the two we are discussing, if we contrast the extremes of justice and injustice, we shall be able to make the decision correctly. But if we don't, we won't. What then is the contrast I have in mind? It is this. We will subtract nothing from the injustice of the unjust person, and nothing from the justice of the just one. On the contrary, we will take each person to be perfect in his own pursuit. First, then, let the unjust person act like clever craftsmen. An eminent ship's captain or doctor, for example, knows the difference between what his craft can and cannot do. He attempts the first, what he can do, but lets the second, what he can't do, go by. And if he happens to slip, he can put things right. In the same way, if he is to be completely unjust, let the unjust person correctly attempt unjust acts and remain undetected. The one who is caught should be thought inept. For the extreme of injustice is to be believed to be just without actually being so. And our completely unjust person must be given complete injustice. Nothing must be subtracted from it. We must allow that while doing the greatest injustice, he has nonetheless provided himself with the greatest reputation for justice. If he does happen to slip up, he must be able to put it right, either through his ability to speak persuasively if any of his unjust activities are discovered, or to use force if force is needed, because he is courageous and strong and has provided himself with wealth and friends. So remember, Glaucon is really trying to get Socrates to defend justice on its own merits. So what rhetorical technique is he employing here? It has to do with one of the logical fallacies that we looked at. He's trying to make the case for injustice as strong as possible. What fallacy did we look at that has to do with misrepresenting a view? And then knocking down the misrepresentation. Right, exactly. Yeah. What Glaucon is doing here is he's trying to make the unjust life in this hypothetical situation as strong and as desirable as possible. He's steel-manning the argument for injustice. Okay? Because again, he wants Socrates to put forth the strongest argument he can for justice. What better way to do that than to make the opposite position as strong as possible? Then if Socrates can knock it down, then he knows he has a good argument for living a just life, right? So he's saying, like, look, in a hypothetical scenario, let's suppose that the unjust person always succeeds, they have a reputation for justice, and if they get in trouble, if they happen to slip up, they're able to put it right, either through their ability to speak persuasively or to use force if force is needed. What is significant about that characteristic of this thought experiment, of this story? What is he saying there? What kinds of powers are we giving to the unjust person in this story? He must be able to put it right either through his ability to speak persuasively or what? Or use force. Are these things associated with philosophy? Speaking persuasively and using force.
It's not really, but it is associated with like sophistry. I don't know if that's how you would say being a sophist.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Using force definitely is associated with sophistry. It's associated with the tyrannical character, right, that we're trying to get away from, or at least Plato is. Persuasive speech, you could say, is kind of philosophical, right? You want to persuade people of the truth. But also there's an aspect of this that's very rhetorical, right? It has to do with rhetoric. Rhetoric is associated with sophistry, playing around with words. Okay? So let's make this guy a master of rhetoric, and let's give him the power and the ability to use violence if he needs to. Having hypothesized such a person, let's now put the just man next to him in our argument. Now, what's Glaucon going to do? He's going to try to make the unjust life sound amazing, and the unjust person's going to get away with it all, and he's going to try to make the just life sound terrible. Someone who is simple and noble, and who, as Aeschylus says, does not want to be believed to be good, but to be so. We must take away his reputation, for a reputation for justice would bring him honor and rewards. So it would not be clear whether he is being just for the sake of justice or for the sake of those honors and rewards. So, if we're going to defend justice on its own merits, in our hypothetical scenario, we're going to presume the just person has a terrible reputation. All right? We must strip him of everything except justice and make his situation the opposite of the unjust person's. Though he does know injustice, he must have the greatest reputation for it, so that he may be tested with regard to justice by seeing whether or not he can withstand a bad reputation and its consequences. Let him stay like that, unchanged until he is dead. Just, but all his life believed to be unjust. In this way, both will reach the extremes, the one of justice and the other of injustice, and we will be able to judge which of them is happier. Socrates responds, "Ooh, my dear Glaucon, how vigorously you have scoured each of the men in our competition, just as you would a pair of statues for an art competition." I'm doing the best I can, he says. Since the two are as I have described, in any case, it should not be difficult to complete the account of the sort of life that awaits each of them. But it must be done. And if what I say sounds crude, Socrates, remember that it is not I who speak, but those who praise injustice at the expense of justice. They will say that the just person in such circumstances will be whipped, stretched on a rack, chained, blinded with a red-hot iron, and at the end, when he has suffered every sort of bad thing, he will be impaled. And will realize then that one should not want to be just, but to believed to be just. Indeed, Aeschylus' words are far more correctly applied to the unjust man. For people will say that it is really the unjust person who does not want to be believed to be unjust, but actually to be so, because he bases his practice on the truth about things and does not allow reputation to regulate his life. He is the one who harvests a deep furrow in his mind where wise counsels propagate. First, he rules his city because of his reputation for justice. Next, he marries into any family he wishes, gives his children in marriage to anyone he wishes, has contracts and partnerships with anyone he wants, and besides benefiting himself in all these ways, he profits because he is not disgusted by doing injustice. In any contest, public or private, he is the winner and does better than his enemies. And by doing better than them, he becomes wealthy, benefits his friends, and harms his enemies. He makes adequate sacrifices to the gods and sets up magnificent offerings to them, and takes much better care of the gods, and indeed of the human beings he favors, than the just person. So he may reasonably expect that the gods in turn will love him more than the just person. That is why they say, Socrates, that gods and humans provide a better life for the unjust person than for the just one. So Glaucon is really painting kind of an interesting picture here, right? He said, okay, let's have a hypothetical scenario where we have a just guy who's just in everything that he does, but nobody can see that he's just. He doesn't get any rewards for it. All he gets are punishments. And then on the other hand, let's have an unjust person who's believed to be just, who has money and friends and wealth. He's going to do better than other people because he's going to screw over others. Glaucon says, it's obvious which life is better here. The unjust life seems to be more profitable, does it not? And we continue. When Glaucon had said this, I had it in mind to respond, but his brother Adeimantus intervened. You surely do not think the argument has been adequately stated. He's going to pile on even more. He's going to make this even more difficult for Socrates. Okay? Oh, why shouldn't I? The most important point has not been mentioned. Well then, as the saying goes, a man's brother must stand by him. So if Glaucon has omitted something, you must help him. Though for my part, at any rate, what he has already said is quite enough to throw me to the canvas and make me incapable of coming to the aid of justice. Nonsense. But listen to what more I have to say as well. You see, in order to clarify what Glaucon has in mind, we should also fully explore the arguments that are opposed to the ones he gave, those that praise justice and disparage injustice. As you know, when fathers speak to their sons and give them advice, they say that one must be just, as do all those who have others in their charge. But they do not praise justice itself, only the good reputation it brings. The inducement they offer is that if we are reputed to be just, then, as a result of our reputation, we will get political offices, good marriages, and all the things that Glaucon recently said that the just man would get as a result of having a good reputation. But these people have even more to say about the consequences of reputation. For by throwing in being well thought of by the gods, they have plenty of good things to talk about. All the ones the gods are said to give those who are pious. For example, the noble Hesiod and Homer say such things. For Hesiod says that the gods make the oak trees bear acorns at the top, bees in the middle, and fleecy sheep heavy laden with wool for those who are just, and tells of many other good things akin to these. And Homer says pretty much the same. When a good king in his piety upholds justice, the black earth bears wheat barley for him, and his trees are heavy with fruit. His sheep bear lambs unfailingly, and the sea yields up its fish. Musaeus and his son claim that the gods give just people even more exciting goods than these. In their account, they lead the just to Hades, seat them on couches, provide them with a symposium of pious people, crown them with wreaths, and make them spend all their time drinking, as if they thought eternal drunkenness was the finest wage of virtue. Others stretch even further the wages that virtue receives from the gods. For they say that someone who is pious and keeps his promises leaves his children's children and a whole race behind him. In these and other similar ways, they praise justice. But the impious and the unjust they bury in mud in Hades, and they compel them to carry water in a sieve. They bring them into bad repute while they are still alive. And all those penalties that Glaucon gave to just people who are thought to be unjust, they give to the unjust ones. But they have nothing else to say. That, then, is the praise and blame given to each. But in addition, Socrates, there is another kind of argument about justice and injustice for you to consider. One that is used both by private individuals and by poets. With one voice, they all chant the hymn that justice and temperance are fine things, but difficult and onerous, while intemperance and injustice are sweet and easy to acquire and are only shameful by repute and convention. They also say that unjust deeds are, for the most part, more profitable than just ones. And whereas they are perfectly willing to bestow public and private honors on bad people, provided they have wealth and other types of power, and to declare them to be happy, they dishonor and disregard those who happen to be in any way weak or poor, even though they admit they are better than the others. But most amazing of all are the accounts they give of the gods and virtue, and how it is that the gods too assign misfortune and a bad life to many good people, and the opposite fate to their opposites. Begging priests and prophets go to the doors of rich people and persuade them that, through sacrifices and charms, they have acquired a God-given power. If the rich person or any of his ancestors has committed an injustice, they can fix it with pleasant rituals. And if he wishes to injure an enemy, he will be able to harm a just one or an unjust one alike at any cost, little cost, since by means of spells and enchantments they can persuade the gods to do their bidding. And the poets are brought forward as witnesses to all these accounts. Some harp on the ease of vice, on the grounds that vice in abundance is easy to get, the road is smooth and begins beside you, but the gods have put sweat between us and virtue, and a road that is long, rough, and steep. Others quote Homer to bear witness that the gods can be influenced by humans, since he too said, even the gods themselves can be swayed by prayer, and with sacrifices and soothing promises. Incense and libation drinking, human beings turn them from their purpose when someone has transgressed and sinned. And they present a noisy throng of books by Musaeus and Orpheus, who are the offspring, they claim, of Selene and the Muses, on which they base their rituals. And they persuade not only private individuals, but whole cities that there are in fact absolutions and purifications for unjust deeds. For the living, these consist of ritual sacrifices and pleasant games. But there are also special rites for the dead. These initiations, as they call them, free people from evils hereafter, while terrible things await those who have not performed the rituals. So what do people say about justice and injustice? First of all, which life is easier? The just one or the unjust one? Why? Why is the unjust easier?
I think it's just easier because your body just wants to do like what is what you want, and the just thing goes against what necessarily something that allows out is better for you.
Right. If we're going to follow the distinction that Glaucon made earlier between what we naturally do and what we create, the rules we create as a society, it's easy to do the natural thing, right? When you're horny, you have sex. When you're thirsty, you drink. When you're hungry, you eat. These things, the poets seem to say, are associated with vice, right? It's easy to do the selfish thing. It's easy to do the natural thing. It's hard to do the right thing, right? It's hard to do the healthy thing. It's hard to do the virtuous thing. To tell the truth when you don't want to hand in the wallet to the lost and found, right? When there's money in it and you could just keep it. It's hard to speed when you have somewhere to be. It's hard to sit in class and listen when you just want to play Minecraft on your computer. Right? It seemed like doing the vicious stuff, the stuff associated with vice, with pleasure, with bodily comfort, is easy. But the virtuous life is hard and onerous. Do y'all agree with that? Can you speak any personal experience with this?
Well, like kind of like your example, it'd be a lot easier to just steal money, but it's a lot harder to like actually work for it and go to a job every day.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Especially if there weren't any like repercussions for those actions.
Ah, precisely. Yeah. I'm sure y'all have done some non-work things on company time. Maybe taken something from the store that you work at when nobody's looking, right? Oh, maybe you're only supposed to have, one burrito during your shift. You have a second one because you're hungry, right? And they're not going to miss it, right? Yeah, doing the good thing, the just thing is hard. But what's more than this, there doesn't seem to be much incentive, Glaucon says, according to the poets, for living a good life. For one, it seems like the gods give good lives to unjust people, and the just good people in life suffer. And second of all, even if you do an unjust thing, what can you always do? Let's say you lived your whole life in an unjust way. What can you do? You can ask for forgiveness. You can do the necessary rituals and sacrifices, and you will be fine when you enter Hades. Right? Christianity says something similar, doesn't it? Even if you live a terrible, sinful life, as long as you repent before you die, you're forgiven. Right? So it seems like there's not much incentive to live a just life, and living a just life is harder. And it doesn't seem to get you as much as an unjust life does. So continuing on at 365a, just below that. With so many things of this sort, my dear Socrates, being said about virtue and vice, and about how human beings and gods honor them, what effect do we suppose they have on the souls of young people? I mean, those who are naturally gifted and able to flit, so to speak, from one of these sayings to another, and gather from them an impression of what sort of people they should be, and of how best to travel the road of life. He would surely ask himself Pindar's question: is it by justice or by crooked tricks that I will scale the higher wall, and so live out my life surrounded by secured defenses? And he will answer, as for what people say, they say there is no advantage in my being just if I am not also thought to be just. Bless you. Whereas the troubles and penalties of being just are apparent. But the unjust person, who has secured for himself a reputation for justice, lives the life of a god. Since then, opinion forcibly overcomes truth and controls happiness, as the wise men say, I must surely turn entirely to it. I should create an illusionist painting of virtue around me to deceive those who come near, but keep behind it the wise Erchilichus's greedy and cunning fox. But surely, someone will object, it is not easy for evil to remain always hidden. We will reply that nothing great is easy. And in any case, if we are to be happy, we must go where the tracks of the argument lead. To remain undiscovered, we will form secret societies and political clubs. And there are teachers of persuasion to make us clever in dealing with assemblies and law courts. Therefore, partly by persuasion, partly by force, we will contrive to do better than other people without paying the penalty. So look at that. Socrates has derived from logic the existence of conspiracy groups. Right? Of course, unjust people are going to try to hide their tracks. They're going to form secret clubs in which they do this and they conspire. But surely we cannot hide from the gods or overpower them by force, one might object. Well, if the gods do not exist or do not concern themselves with human affairs, why should we worry at all about hiding from them? On the other hand, if they do exist and do care about us, we know nothing about them except what we have learned from the laws and from the poets who give us their genealogies. But these are the very people who tell us that the gods can be persuaded and influenced by sacrifices, gentle prayers, and offerings. Hence, we should believe them on both matters or on neither. So if it turns out the gods don't exist, unjust people aren't going to be punished in the afterlife because there is no afterlife. But if it turns out the gods do exist, look, we can always get good with the gods later in our lives by offering the right sacrifices and repenting. Okay? If we believe them, we should be unjust and offer sacrifices from the fruits of our injustice. For if we are just, our only gain is not to be punished by the gods, but we will lose the profits of our injustice. But if we are unjust, we will get those profits, and afterward we will entreat the gods, and persuading them, escape with our crimes and transgressions unpunished. But in Hades, won't we pay the penalty for crimes committed here, either ourselves or through our children's children? My friend, the young man will say as he does his rational calculation, mystery rites and the gods of absolution have great power. The greatest cities tell us this, as do those children of the gods who have become the gods' poets and prophets and reveal it to be so. On the basis of what further argument, then, should we choose justice over the greatest injustice? For if we possess such injustice with a false facade, we will do as we have a mind to among gods and humans, both while we are living and when we are dead, as both the masses and the eminent claim. So given all that has been said, Socrates, what device could get someone with any power, whether of mind, wealth, body, or family, to be willing to honor justice and not laugh aloud when he hears it praised? Indeed, if anyone can show what we have said is false and has adequate knowledge that justice is best, what he feels for unjust people won't be anger, but a large measure of forgiveness. After all, he knows that apart from someone of godlike character, who is disgusted by doing injustice, or someone who has gained knowledge and avoids injustice for that reason, no one is just willingly. Through cowardice or old age, or some other weakness, people do indeed object to injustice. But it is obvious that they do so only because they lack the power to do injustice. For the first of them to gain that power is the first to do as much injustice as he can. So, doesn't the unjust life sound good? Why wouldn't anybody want to live an unjust life? Why live a just life at all if it's hard, if you don't get anything from it, if people don't even see you doing just things? What's the point?
So the part where it talks about the poets talking about how you can receive repentance for your sins, but what if that is that is also done in an unjust manner sometimes? Like during this time, you'd have people get paid in order to repent your sins, like indulgences.
Yeah.
If that's unjust in the first place, then the whole process is unjust.
Well, so what you're mentioning there, indulgences, that is something that within the Christian religion has been kind of poo-pooed by Protestants and said that it's not biblical. But within Greek polytheistic religion, it doesn't really matter where your heart is at or where your intention is at. The only thing that matters is kind of going through the sacrifice. So just by doing the sacrifices, just by making the prayers, there was the expectation that you would kind of be forgiven, even if your heart wasn't in it. So does that make their argument for injustice a little stronger? In Greek polytheism, the gods are very similar to humans. In fact, one of the only things that distinguishes the gods and goddesses from humans is the length of their lives. The gods and the goddesses experience jealousy, anger, envy, everything that humans experience, lust. It's just that they live forever. And so if there were gods like that, yeah, would they really care that somebody was offering rituals with the right intentions? No, they just want money, right? And people praying to them, and they want the feeling of people relying on them, right? Like a human would. If we are to follow the idea that, human nature and therefore godly nature is naturally kind of selfish and self-interested, right? So are you all convinced? You're going to live unjust lives from now on? Going to go out, steal some stuff, murder some people? No?
Whenever we did the discussion question about this argument,
Yeah.
I had looked up things about the naturalness of injustice and emotions like greed, and a lot of people think that it's a natural thing, but there are other people who think that emotions like greed are strictly situational. We learn these things. It's not something that's innately in us.
Ah. And then there are other thinkers that you can find, such as Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who was a romantic thinker during the Enlightenment period, who thought that basically the bad emotions and tendencies that humans have, they don't have naturally. They have because they're conditioned into them by the societies in which they live. So maybe we aren't naturally evil. Maybe we naturally don't want to do bad things. It's just that we've been conditioned to think and act like that. Anybody think that's plausible? Maybe? I kind of always have to balance that argument with Thomas Hobbes's view of human nature, where he says that humans are naturally self-interested, and they will resort to violence in order to get what they want if they want it bad enough. I'm like, I see the truth in both of these, I think. Some truth. But I don't know. And so Glaucon and Adeimantus say, look, if we put forth this hypothetical, it's clear that the unjust life is preferable. It's more profitable. Even the way people speak about justice shows that it's not something people want for itself. They only want it so they can have a good reputation and the things that come from that. And so, in all this, he says, has no other cause than the one that led to the whole of Glaucon's and my argument with you, Socrates. Socrates, you amazing man, we said, of all of you who claim to praise justice, beginning from the earliest heroes of old, whose accounts survive up to the men of the present day, not one has ever blamed injustice or praised justice except by mentioning the reputations, honors, and rewards that are their consequences. No one has ever adequately described what each does itself through its own power, by its presence in the soul of the person who possesses it, even if it remains hidden from gods and humans. No one, whether in poetry or in private discussions, has adequately argued that injustice is the greatest evil a soul can have in it, and justice the greatest good. If all of you had spoken in this way and had tried to persuade us from our earliest youth, we would not now be guarding against one another's injustice, but each would be his own best guardian, afraid that by doing injustice, he would be living on intimate terms with the worst thing possible. That, Socrates, and probably other things are, in addition, what Thrasymachus, or possibly someone else, might say in discussing justice and injustice, crudely inverting their power, in my view. But I, for I have no reason to hide anything from you, want to hear the opposite from you. And that is why I'm speaking with all the force I can muster. So, do not merely demonstrate to us by argument that justice is stronger than injustice, but tell us what each one itself does, because of itself, to someone who possesses it. That makes the one bad and the other good. Follow Glaucon's advice and do not take reputations into account. For if you do not deprive justice and injustice of their true reputations and attach false ones to them, we will say that it is not justice you are praising, but its reputation, nor injustice you are condemning, but its reputation, and that you are encouraging us to be unjust but keep it secret. In that case, we will say that you agree with Thrasymachus that justice is the good of another, the advantage of the stronger, while injustice is one's own advantage and profit, though not the advantage of the weaker. You agree that justice is one of the greatest goods. Remember, a good that is good in and of itself and good because of what it brings about. The ones that are worth having for the sake of their consequences, but much more for their own sake, such as seeing, hearing, knowing, being healthy, of course, and all the others that are genuine goods by nature and not simply by repute. This is what I want you to praise about justice. How does it, because of its very self, benefit its possessor? And how does injustice harm him? Leave wages and reputations for others to praise. I can put up with other people praising justice and blaming injustice in that way, extolling the reputations and wages of the one and denigrating those of the other, but I won't put up with that from you unless you insist on it. For you have spent your whole life investigating this and nothing else. So do not merely demonstrate to us by argument that justice is stronger than injustice, but show what effect each one itself has because of itself on the person who has it, the one for good and the other for bad, whether it remains hidden from gods and human beings or not. So, Glaucon and Adeimantus have put forth a very difficult hypothetical for us to knock down, right? In this thought experiment, they suppose that the unjust person has the best reputation in the world. They have wealth, friends, family, lovers, property, all this stuff. The just person has none of that. They have a bad reputation. They do just things, but people think they're unjust. And they're tortured, and they're put in prison, and they live a painful, sufferable life. Glaucon and Adeimantus are doing this so that, well, linguistically, stylistically, so that Plato can provide a strong argument for justice. Okay, they're steel manning the argument for injustice, and throughout the whole rest of the book, Plato is going to be trying to knock that argument down, and by putting forth his own conception of justice. What he's going to end up saying through his own long, extended, hypothetical thought experiment is that justice is good in and of itself because it has something to do with the optimal functioning of the city and of the human being. So justice isn't just good because of reputation and the goods and services that it brings people, but it's also good for being the best human that you can be, doing human stuff well. Okay? Any questions so far? We're about to get to a turning point in the dialogue. Glaucon and Adeimantus have just put forth this strong argument for injustice. The rest of the book, as we'll see, is going to be taken up with Socrates basically constructing from scratch a city, a hypothetical city. And he's going to be comparing the city to the individual character of humans. And he's going to say these reflect one another. And if we construct a city by scratch, hypothetically, and try to find justice and injustice in it, because it is larger and more complex, that'll be able to help us see where justice and injustice are in the individual. and how it impacts the individual. So this is what the rest of the book is going to be concerned with. Constructing the ins and outs of this hypothetical ideal city. And then discussing how that translates into, well, what does justice and injustice look like in each individual person? And how is that made manifest? Now, I had always admired the natural characters of Glaucon and Adeimantus, but I was especially pleased when I heard what they had to say on this occasion. And I replied, "Son of that man, Glaucon's lover was not wrong to begin the elegy he wrote when you distinguished yourselves at the battle of Megara by addressing you as sons of Ariston, godlike family of a famous man." So I'd like to just stop here and tell you about a little cultural thing. This is a weird thing that the ancient Greeks did, okay? It was commonplace back then for older males to take young teenage boys or men who were in their late teenage years or 20s as lovers, okay? It wasn't just a sexual thing, it was also like a mentorship thing. So they would take a lover, a young boy, under their wing and kind of mentor them. So that's the practice that's being alluded to here. And it says so in footnote 14. It discusses this. Homosexual relations between older men and late adolescent boys were an acceptable part of Athenian social life, especially among the upper classes. Okay. That, my dear friends, was well said, in my view. For something altogether godlike must have affected you if you are not convinced that injustice is better than justice, and yet can speak like that on its behalf. And I do believe that you really are unconvinced by your own words. I infer this from your general character, since if I had only your arguments to go on, I would not trust you. The more I trust you, however, the more I am at a loss as to what to do. I do not see how I can be of help. Indeed, I believe I am incapable of it. And here is my evidence. I thought that what I had said to Thrasymachus showed that justice is better than injustice, but you won't accept that from me as proof. On the other hand, I do not see how I can refuse my help, for I fear that it may be even impious to have breath in one's body and the ability to speak, and yet stand idly by and not defend justice when it is being prosecuted. The best thing then is to give justice any assistance I can. Glaucon and the others begged me not to abandon the argument, but to help in every way to track down what justice and injustice each is, and the truth about their respective benefits. So why do you think Socrates is kind of saying, I don't know if I'm going to be able to help? This sounds kind of hard, guys, but I might have a moral obligation to help. If you're having a conversation with someone, are they going to get invested or interested in the conversation if you just do all the talking? Like I'm doing now? No, remember, he's concerned about their education, and the best education comes with participation with the instructor. Right? Right? Right. Okay, good. So he's trying to kind of lure them more into the dialogue by saying, I don't know if I can do this, guys. Because by kind of putting forth maybe a little white lie there, they're going to become more invested. And they're going to say, no, come on, we got to figure this out, right? And they're going to try to lure him back in and argue that he should come back in. And that's what's happening here. So this rhetorical thing kind of that Socrates is doing is getting them more invested in the argument, more invested in the conversation. So I told them what I had in mind. Look, the investigation we are undertaking is not an easy one, in my view, but requires keen eyesight. So since we are not clever people, I think we should adopt the method of investigation that we would use if, lacking keen eyesight, we were told to identify small letters from a distance, and then notice that the same letters existed elsewhere in a larger size and on a larger surface. We would consider it a godsend, I think, to be allowed to identify the larger ones first, and then to examine the smaller ones to see whether they are really the same. Would someone be Adamentus for me? Somebody, anybody. All right, perfect. Go for it.
Of course we would, but how is this case similar to our investigation in your view?
I will tell you. We say, don't we, that there is a justice that belongs to a single man and also one that belongs to a whole city?
Certainly.
And a city is larger than a single man?
Yes, it is larger.
Perhaps then there will be more justice in the larger thing, and it will be easier to discern. So, if you are willing, let's first find out what sort of thing justice is in cities, and afterward look for it in the individual to see if the larger entity is similar in form to the smaller one.
I think that is a fine idea.
So, this is an image that comes up a lot. This is an image that I told you about when I introduced the Republic to you. The individual is like the city is an important common theme. And this is the theme that's going to be invoked for the next hundreds of pages. Okay, literally the entire rest of this book is going to be talking about the social policy and the characteristics of this hypothetical ideal city. Okay. If in our discussion we could look at a city coming to be, wouldn't we also see its justice coming to be and its injustice as well?
We probably would.
And once that process is completed, could we expect to find what we are looking for more easily?
Yes, much more easily.
Do you think we should try to carry it out then? It is no small task in my view, so think it over.
It has been thought over. Don't do anything besides try.
Well then, we're going to launch right into it. A city, bless you, comes to exist, I believe, because none of us is individually self-sufficient, but each has many needs he cannot satisfy. Or do you think that a city is founded on some other principle?
No.
So this is an interesting point. Why do communities originate in the first place? If you can do everything yourself, if you know the ways of the world, the ways of the wild, if you can build a house, you can start a fire, you can kill and skin an animal, you can do everything, do you need to start a community? If you can do everything yourself, no. But why do we start communities?
Humans are naturally social creatures, and we like to be around other people.
We're naturally social creatures. Our psychological and spiritual health seems to depend in part on being a member of a certain social group or a community. But also, we have a bunch of needs that we cannot satisfy by ourselves. Some of those are psychological needs, right? Because we're social creatures.
Another one would be like, even if you're like completely self-sufficient, you still need, like, say, protection of like your farming area, and you can manage that through like organization of like the military.
Right. Yeah. And we're going to get to that too, the importance of an army as our city gets larger in this hypothetical scenario. The purpose of community, in other words, is to fulfill humans' needs, because we can't fulfill them by ourselves. We cannot fulfill all of our physical and psychological needs by ourselves. This view that Socrates is putting forth is actually a prefiguration of the social political theory of Thomas Hobbes, who writes about the necessity of government and human nature in his famous book, Leviathan. In that book, he argues that humans are naturally self-interested and naturally rational, and so they will resort to violence in a society in which there aren't any laws or government or police to achieve their ends, and that government is a necessity to keep people in line and to keep too much chaos from spurting forth. But he also thinks that humans end up building societies because they have needs that they cannot satisfy that by themselves, just as Socrates is saying here. Then, because we have many needs, and because one of us calls on another out of one need, And on a third out of a different need, we gather many into a single settlement as partners and helpers. And we call such a shared settlement a city. Isn't that so?
Yes, indeed.
And if they share things with one another, if they give something to one another or take something from one another, don't they do so because each believes that this is better for himself?
Of course.
Come on, then. Let's, in our discussion, create a city from the beginning. But its real creator, it seems, will be our need.
Certainly.
Okay, so this is kind of just a little funny stylistic thing that Plato is doing here. Socrates has stipulated that communities are formed on the basis of need, to satisfy our needs. And then he's saying, we're going to create a hypothetical city. Its basis will be our need for discovering what justice is. Whereas in practice, a community coming together is on the basis of real physical and psychological need. So there's just a cool little parallel going here. Now, the first and greatest of our needs is to provide food in order to sustain existence and life.
Yes, absolutely.
The second is for shelter, and the third is for clothes and things of that sort.
That's right.
Does this remind you of anything?
Maslow's hierarchy.
Right, yeah. Socrates, Plato already knew all this stuff before Maslow came around. Oh. Tell me then, how will a city be able to provide all this? Won't one person have to be a farmer, another a builder, and another a weaver? And shouldn't we add a shoemaker to them or someone else to take care of our bodily needs? A city with the barest necessities, then, would consist of 4 or 5 men?
Apparently.
Well then, should each of them contribute his own work for the common use of all? I mean, should a farmer, although he is only one person, provide food for 4 people and spend quadruple the time and labor to provide food to be shared by them all? Or should he not be concerned about everyone else? Should he produce 1/4 the food in 1/4 the time for himself alone? Should he spend the other 3/4 providing a house, a cloak, and shoes for himself? Should he save himself the bother of sharing with other people and mind his own business on his own?
The first alternative, Socrates, is perhaps easier.
There is nothing strange in that, by Zeus. You see, it occurred to me while you were speaking that, in the first place, we are not all born alike. On the contrary, each of us differs somewhat in nature from the others, one being suited to one job, another to another. Or don't you think so?
I do.
So what is Socrates saying here? In an ideal city, what will the division of labor be like? Will you have one person who's both a mechanic and a conductor and an engineer and a shoemaker? No. What will it be like?
That each person can provide their unique skills to do a unique task.
Exactly. Everybody is going to have one job in this ideal city. If you're good at making shoes, you're a shoemaker. If you're good at teaching, you're a teacher. If you're good at electrical engineering, you're an electrical engineer. Everybody is going to be focused on their one job that their personality, that their mind, and that their skills are suited for. What do you think about this? Is this how we currently run our society? Kinda, yes, no, maybe so. You say more about that? Kind of,
I don't know. I feel like some stuff's the same, some stuff's different.
There are definitely people who are doing what they love, right? And they're good at it, right? Yeah.
I would kind of agree, but I feel like the general education that we go through is so broad that we kind of get pushed out at 18, with just various knowledge and random things, and kind of only the lucky middle and upper class get to go to college and actually pursue something like they're focused in, while the lower class is kind of
Yeah.
Can't do it because they don't have focus or anything.
Right. And our society is not set up to care for those kinds of people, right? It's just, hey, get a job and contribute to the economy, or, you're going to starve. Right?
Yeah, I think this, kind of like what John was saying, like this example assumes that everybody's starting on equal playing field.
Right. So how does that differ from our society right now?
Not everybody necessarily starting at the same place.
And what do you mean starting at the same place?
Like the same resources, same, like people in the United States have a lot more resources than say someone in another country.
Right. Yeah. The ideal city, according to Socrates, is one in which everybody kind of has a different skill set, but they're going to be focused on doing the job that exercises that skill set and nothing else. Okay, you're not going to have somebody who's doing 3 jobs. They're going to spend the majority of their time doing their one job for the benefit of the community. What does this remind you of? Everybody does what they can do well, does their share.
Well, I was going to say that it kind of reminds me of Marxism and his disdain for capitalism, and how he doesn't believe that people should work meaningless jobs and slave away for the rest of their lives.
Right. Yeah. What we see in Plato's Republic is kind of a prefiguration of communism. Yeah. The people, as we'll see later, are supposed to have a love for one another. They're supposed to work together for the good of the community, doing what they love and what they're good at. Not having their hands in all these different jobs, not divvying up their time doing a bunch of different things. Not getting a generalist knowledge like we kind of get in the United States, but getting an education that is tailored for their specific social class. Now, this is where Plato is going to depart from what Marx is going to end up saying. Plato is going to put forth a 3-tiered class society, but we'll get to that later. Okay, so everybody's going to do their job that they're good at, that they're suited for. This might remind you in the Bible, to draw another parallel to Christianity, of the parable of the talents, if anybody knows that story. Well then, would one person do better work if he practiced many crafts or if he practiced one?
If he practiced one.
And it is also clear, I take it, that if one misses the opportune moment in any job, the work is spoiled.
It is clear.
That, I take it, is because the thing that has to be done won't wait until the doer has the leisure to do it. No, instead the doer must, of necessity, pay close attention to what has to be done and not leave it for his idle moments.
Yes, he must.
The result, then, is that more plentiful and better quality goods are more easily produced if each person does one thing for which he is naturally suited and does it at the opportune moment, because his time is freed from all the others.
Absolutely.
So specialization of labor, Plato thinks, is going to make society better off. If we each focus on our one job, we'll be doing great at that one thing. Our time and our attention isn't going to be distracted from having to worry about all these other things, kind of like we have to deal with in our society today, right? Then, Adamentus, we are going to need more than 4 citizens to provide the things we have mentioned. For a farmer won't make his own plow, it seems, if it is going to be a good one, nor his hoe, nor any of his other farm implements. Nor will a carpenter. And he too needs a lot of tools. And the same is true of a weaver and a shoemaker, isn't it?
It is.
So carpenters, metal workers, and many other craftsmen of that sort will share our little city and make it bigger.
Yes, indeed.
Yet it still would not be a great settlement, even if we added cowherds, shepherds, and other herdsmen, so that the farmers would have cows to do their plowing, the builders oxen to share with the farmers in hauling their materials, and the weavers and shoemakers hides and fleeces to use.
It would not be a small city either if it had to hold all that.
Moreover, it is almost impossible, at any rate, to establish the city itself in the sort of place where it will need no imports.
Yes, that is impossible.
Then we will need still other people who will import whatever is needed from another city.
We will.
And if our servant goes empty-handed to another city without any of the things needed by those from whom he is trying to get what his own people need, he will come away empty-handed, won't he?
I should think so.
Our citizens then must produce not only enough for themselves at home, but also goods of the right quality and quantity to satisfy the needs of others.
Yes, they must.
So here, Socrates thinks that if we start building out this imagined hypothetical ideal city, we're going to need all these different jobs so that people can make the tools for all these different things. But then also, we're also going to want to be able to trade with others. So we're going to need to add more people to the city so that we can ramp up production, so we can trade things with others, so we can get the things perhaps that we need if something goes wrong in the city or if it's a luxury that we want. Trade here is also kind of being implicitly praised by Plato, I think, as building trust with other communities. So, we will need more farmers and other craftsmen in our city.
Yes.
And also other servants, I imagine, who are to take care of the imports and exports. These are merchants, aren't they?
Yes.
We will need merchants too then.
Of course.
And if the trade is carried on by sea, we will need a great many others who have expert knowledge of the business of the sea.
A great many indeed.
Again, within the city itself, how will people share with one another the things they each produce? It was in order to share, after all, that we associated with one another and founded a city.
Clearly, they must do it by buying and selling.
So this is going to be another difference between what Plato is going to say and what Marx is going to say eventually through his historically materialistic philosophy. Plato is saying a city is founded on the requirement to satisfy the needs of everyone. But look, people just aren't going to give away shit for free. Okay? That means the city is also going to have some sort of economy to it. The exchange of goods will occur through buying and selling in the marketplace. Then we will need a marketplace and a currency for such exchange, Socrates says.
Yes, indeed.
So if a farmer or any other craftsman brings some of his products to the marketplace, and he does not arrive at the same time as those who want to exchange things with him, is he to sit idly in the marketplace, neglecting his own craft?
Not at all. On the contrary, there will be people who notice the situation and provide the requisite service. In well-organized cities, there are generally those whose bodies are weakest and who are not fit to do any sort of work. Their job is to wait there in the marketplace and exchange money for the goods of those who have something to sell, and then to exchange goods for the money of those who want to buy them.
So these are the middlemen, right? We need some middlemen in the marketplaces who will exchange the goods for the people who are spending their time actually producing them, because they can't sit in the market all day waiting for people to buy them, right? They're focused on making their shit. Okay. The need then causes retailers to be present in our city. Those who wait in the marketplace and provide this service of buying and selling are called retailers, aren't they? Whereas those who travel between cities are called merchants.
Yes, that's correct.
There are also other servants, I think, whose minds would not altogether qualify them for membership in our community, but whose bodies are strong enough for hard labor. So they sell the use of their strength for a price called a wage, and that is why they are called wage earners. Isn't that so?
Yes.
So we also need to make room in our city for people who, whether it's because they want to live in or near our city or they're traveling, will sell their services for a fee. We need to make our city big enough for those people too. So the wage earners too, it seems, serve to complete our city.
I think so.
Well then, Adamentus, has our city now grown to completeness?
Maybe it has.
Then where are justice and injustice to be found in it? With which of the people we considered did they come in?
I have no
Perhaps what you say is right. We must look into it and not back off. First, then, let's see what sort of life these people will lead who have been provided for in this way. They will make food, wine, clothes, and shoes, won't they? And they will build themselves houses. In the summer, they will mostly work naked and barefoot, but in the winter, they will wear adequate clothing and shoes. For nourishment, they will provide themselves with barley meal and wheat flour, which they will knead and bake into noble cakes and loaves and serve up on a reed or on clean leaves. They will recline on couches strewn with yew and myrtles and feast with their children, drink their wine, and crowned with wreaths hymn the gods. They will enjoy having sex with one another, but they will produce no more children than their resources allow, lest they fall into either poverty or war. At this point, Glaucon interrupted and said, will you take Glaucon as well?
It seems that you make your people feast without any relishes.
True enough, I was forgetting that they will also have relishes. Luxuries, in other words. Salt, of course, and olives and cheese. And they will boil roots and vegetables the way they boil them in the country. We will give them desserts too, I imagine, consisting of figs, chickpeas, and beans. And they will roast myrtles and acorns before the fire and drink in moderation. And so they will live in peace and good health, it seems. And when they die at a ripe old age, they will pass on a similar sort of life to their children.
If you were found in the city of pigs, Socrates, isn't that just what you would provide to fatten them?
What then would you have me do, Glaucon?
Just what is conventional. If they are not to suffer hardship, they should recline on proper couches, I suppose, dine at tables, and have the relishes and desserts that people have now.
So Glaucon is saying, look at the city that we have. Okay? We have salt, we have olives, we have cheeses, we have nice couches and cushions and nice robes. None of this stuff is figuring into what you've constructed so far, Socrates. You want these people to live like animals? Let's give these people some luxuries. Okay? People need luxuries in order to have a good life. And Socrates is going to respond in an interesting way. All right, I understand. It isn't merely the origins of a city that we are considering, it seems, but those of a city that is luxurious, too. And that may not be a bad idea. For by examining such a city, we might perhaps see how justice and injustice grow up in cities. Yet the true city, in my view, is the one we have described, the healthy one, as it were. Socrates thinks the ideal city is the city that doesn't have luxuries. Why? The people will be more willing to live a virtuous life. They're not going to fight over things because they don't have any luxuries or wealth and profit to fight over. Everybody's just going to be doing what's necessary for survival. But what we see when Glaucon pipes in and says, hey, why aren't you going to give everybody luxuries? What we see here is Socrates admitting that if we allow this into our hypothetical, we will see how justice and injustice appear in cities and in individuals. Why? A city that has more than it needs is concerned with this word that I mentioned last time, pleonexia. Pleonexia. And that means, when you translate it into English, to do better or to have more. Throughout the course of this book, what we're going to come to understand, according to Socrates, is that the chief source of injustice in a city and in an individual is a person wanting or having more than they need. So meditate on that. Meditate on how greed, jealousy, envy, and injustice grows from wanting more than you need. And see if you think that's true. Okay, we'll pick it up at 373A on Thursday.